Sandra Bullock stepped into the luxury jewelry store, quiet and unassuming, dark jeans, a black turtleneck, elegant in its simplicity. Across the room, Margaret Winchester, draped in white fur and glittering diamonds, narrowed her eyes. "Are they letting just anyone in now?" she whispered, gaze fixed on Sandra's understated look. Sandra didn't react, but silence has a way of making arrogance echo louder. Then the door chimed. A man in a black jacket stepped in. His prez effortlessly commanding. Keanu Reeves scanned the room, his eyes landing on Sandra. A small smile formed. Margaret had no idea that the lesson she was about to learn would come from one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. What happened next turned into a scandal no one saw coming. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Sandra Bullock enters the luxury jewelry store in Beverly Hills without drawing attention. Her steps are steady, her posture relaxed, well-fitted dark jeans, a black turtleneck, minimal makeup and loose hair. No flashy jewelry, just a discreet watch and a simple belt. The environment around her breathes opulence. Gleaming display cases showcase rare diamonds, impeccably dressed attendants guide high-profile clients through exclusive collections. Polite whispers blend with the occasional clink of jewelry being handled. Sandra moves between the displays, observing every detail without hurry. A salesperson walks past her without offering assistance, not out of rudeness, but because in this space where luxury is treated as a symbol of status, a woman dressed so simply can go unnoticed. On the other side of the store, Margaret Winchester examines a diamond necklace. She is the opposite of Sandra in every way, a pristine white fur coat, perfectly manicured nails, jewelry shimmering under the store's golden lights, her exclusive. Her bag rests on her forearm like a trophy. The expensive perfume announces her presence before she even speaks. Margaret lifts the necklace against the light, evaluating the piece as if judging a work of art. Her companion stands beside her in silence, waiting for her opinion. Then Margaret sees Sandra. Her gaze locks onto the jeans, the plain black sweater with no logo goes, the absence of any ostentatious display of wealth. Something in her expression hardens. She tilts her head slightly and whispers to her friend, not caring if anyone hears. Are they letting just anyone in now? Look at this jean in a black sweater. Does she think she's a target? Her friend smirks slightly but says nothing. A few jewelry store employees, more attentive, catch the remark and exchange quick glances. Sandra hears it, but she doesn't react. She simply continues browsing the jewelry display, a small smile on her lips, her calmness, her complete lack of need to justify herself or respond makes Margaret's jab feel even more hollow. But Margaret isn't done. She adjusts her coat over her shoulders and steps forward, determined to ensure that her opinion is heard. What she doesn't know is that this will be one of the greatest lessons of her life. The atmosphere in the jewelry store shifts subtly as Margaret decides that merely ignoring Sandra Bullock is not enough. Her sharp gaze scans Sandra from head to toe, taking in every detail of her simple attire: dark jeans, a black turtleneck, loose hair without any elaborate styling, minimal makeup. Margaret feels an unfamiliar irritation rise in her chest. What is a woman dressed like that doing here? She holds the diamond necklace in her hands, letting the piece slip through her fingers as she admires her own reflection in the glass display. The sparkle of the jewels matches the gleam of her vanity. The woman beside her, a brunette with her hair and a perfectly styled bun, notices Margaret's change in demeanor and leans in slightly. Something wrong? Margaret doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she lifts her chin slightly and murmurs, still watching Sandra, are they letting just anyone in now? Look at that jeans in a black top. Does she think she's a target? She makes no effort to keep her voice low. The comment is meant to be music. Heard? Her friend smirks, not fully committing to the sentiment but clearly intrigued by the contrast. Her gaze also lingers on Sandra, as if trying to understand why a woman who doesn't flaunt wealth walks into this store with such ease. A store associate previously focused on arranging an exclusive collection of watches, glances up. Discreetly he exchanges quick look with another employee behind the counter, both subtly assessing the situation. No one intervenes, and Sandra she heard of course she did, but she doesn't react. Without so much as a flicker of acknowledgement, she keeps her gaze on the jewelry display in front of her, tracing the fine details of sapphire and diamond rings resting on velvet cushions. Her expression remains unreadable, calm, composed. This her indifference bothers Margaret more than any reaction would have. A slight sneer hugs at the corner of Margaret's lips. Had Sandra snapped back, at least there would be something to work with, but ignoring her as if her words carried no weight, that to Margaret is an insult in itself. She adjusts the pristine white fur coat draped over her shoulders and takes a step forward, determined to reaffirm her superiority. This time she doesn't whisper, she speaks loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. Oh sweetheart, are you lost? The costume jewelry section is in the mall next door. This time the effect is immediate. The air around them seems to freeze for a moment. A few employees exchange uncertain glances. A customer who had been examining a gold bracelet pauses and subtly tilts his head. The sales associate who had ignored Sandra now watches the unfolding scene intently, holding a tray of diamond earrings as if waiting to see how this will play out. Sandra doesn't move immediately. She blinked slowly, absorbing Margaret's words without any urgency to respond. Her expression remains unshaken, as serene as if the remark had been nothing more than an idle observation. Then in a deliberately unhurried motion she slides her fingers across an emerald ring inside the display, and without looking at Margaret, offers the faintest smile. She turns away, not to reply but simply to observe another showcase, making it clear that Margaret is not worth her attention. The gesture is subtle but powerful. The tension in the room tightens. Margaret blinks quickly, caught off guard. Was that dismissal? Sandra Bullock, the woman who was clearly dressed more modestly than anyone in the store, just disregarded her completely. A warm flush of irritation creeps up Margaret's chest. She had expected a reaction, perhaps sarcasm, maybe embarrassment, or even a defensive response, but being ignored as if her words meant nothing. That more than anything infuriates her. She needs to regain control of this space, but before she can open her mouth to say anything else, another voice cuts through the silence, deep, steady, casual, yet carrying a weight that commands attention. Funny, I was just thinking that class has nothing to do with expensive jewelry. The weight of those words lingers in the air. The silence in the jewelry store shifts once more. This time it's heavier. Margaret feels a shiver crawl down her spine before she even turns to see who just spoke. The employee, once hesitant, now looked directly toward the store's entrance. A customer who had been about to leave pauses, slightly tilting his head in the direction of the voice. Even without seeing who it is, Margaret senses that something has changed. Her pulse quickens slightly, but she doesn't know why. With a mixture of irritation and curiosity she turns slowly, and then she sees him. The words linger in the air like a quiet thunder. Funny, I was just thinking that class has nothing to do with expensive jewelry. The effect is immediate. The quiet murmurs of sales associates assisting their wealthy clients fade. The room becomes more alert, more charged. Margaret feels a chill run down her spine before she even turns around. There is something about that voice, deep, steady, effortlessly commanding. It isn't loud, it doesn't seek attention, but it holds it anyway. The employees who had previously pretended not to notice the growing tension between Sandra and Margaret now looked directly toward the entrance. A few customers, once absorbed in their selections of luxury jewelry, now shift their focus, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Sandra, however, doesn't look surprised. She would recognize that voice anywhere. Margaret turns slowly, and then she sees a tall man dressed in a black jacket and leather boots has just entered the jewelry store. His posture is relaxed, as if he's simply passing through without a care, yet his presence shifts the energy in the room. He isn't adorned with symbols of status. He isn't wearing the sharp suits favored by the men around him he doesn't flaunt. Designer brands or anything that screams exclusivity, and yet he draws more attention than anyone else in the store. Margaret feels her pulse quicken, not in recognition, not yet, but because of something she can't quite name. The employees stand up a little straighter. A few customers once lost in their own world of luxury are now openly watching him. A hushed murmur ripples through the room. That's when Margaret realizes this man is not just anyone. Margaret narrows her eyes. There's something familiar about him, his sharp features, the dark hair, the effortless presence, the way the people around her are reacting. Her stomach drops as the pieces begin to click into place. Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, his name explodes in her mind like a bolt of lightning. She feels her face heat up, her shoulders tense as her pride wrestles with the truth in front of her, because if that's Keanu Reeves, then Sandra Bullock is not just any woman wearing jeans and a black turtleneck. Margaret's stomach knots. A cold hot wave washes over her. She had just insulted one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, and now standing beside her was one of the most respected men in the industry, a living legend. The weight of that realization settles heavily on her. Keanu adjusts the collar of his jacket. Unhurried, his gaze flickers to sand. Briefly, a quiet understanding passing between them, then he turns his attention to Margaret. The moment lasts only a second, but it's enough. He doesn't speak immediately. He doesn't need to, because the weight of his gaze, calm but filled with meaning, hits Margaret like an invisible blow. There is no open judgment, no look of superiority, but there is something worse, the undeniable truth. Margaret realizes in that instant that Keanu already knows exactly who she is. He doesn't need to ask, he doesn't need an explanation. He saw what happened, he heard, and his expression says everything. He is not impressed. Margaret's throat goes dry for the first time. She feels the urge to step back. The employees, now fully aware of who just walked in, subtly shift their demeanor. A sales associate who had previously hesitated to assist Sandra now straightens his tie and suddenly looks much more attentive. Customers glance at one another, some whispering under their breath, "Oh my God, is that Keanu Reeves?" Another nods in silent shock, and he's with Sandra Bullock. The jewelry store, once filled with people focused only on their extravagant purchases, now has a singular point of focus. The unfolding scene in front of them. Margaret takes a slow breath, trying to regain her composure. But the truth is, inside she feels like she's just taken a direct hit to the stomach. Her mind races. She needs to say something, a comment, a witty remark, something to turn this around, but for the first time in a long time she has nothing, because there is nothing she can say. The silence around her is deafening. She blinks rapidly, looking at Sandra. The actress's expression remains the same, calm, unbothered, as if she had known all along that no words were necessary. And for Margaret, that is the worst part. Keanu finally offers a small smile, but not at Margaret. He turns to Sandra and his tone shifts completely. "Sandy, that necklace would look perfect on you." The silence in the store deepens. The employees hold their breath. The customers exchange wide-eyed glances. Margaret feels her stomach drop even further. The weight of the moment lingers. The jewelry store, once filled with polite conversations and refined transactions, now feels heavy with unspoken tension. The employees exchange discreet glances. The customers, though trying to appear indifferent, cannot ignore the scene unfolding before them. Margaret feels it too, something she is not used to feeling. For years she has commanded rooms like this. She has always been the one to dictate who deserves attention and who does not. She has never been the one who needed to prove herself, but here stands Sandra Bullock, who never even acknowledged her provocations, and Keanu Reeves, who just turned the entire situation into a silent reckoning. Margaret feels heat rise to her face, but she refuses to back down. She will not leave this room defeated. Adjusting her pristine white fur coat over her shoulders, she lifts her chin. If Keanu thinks he can shift the dynamic against her with a single remark, he is sorely mistaken. She turns to Sandra, her voice deliberately polite but laced with underlying venom women like us need to maintain a certain standard she trails. Her fingers over her diamond necklace, letting the store's light catch the brilliance of the saint knows the meaning. Is clear Margaret is trying to remind her of her place but Sandra doesn't flinch, no change in expression, no sign of discomfort, nothing, just an unreadable gaze as if she were watching a predictable scene from a movie she has seen too many times before. Then Keanu finally steps closer. If his presence had been a looming shadow in the background before, he is now the undeniable center of attention. He doesn't rush, he doesn't need to. Every step he takes carries an unspoken weight that Margaret cannot ignore, and then he does something she never expected. Keanu looks directly at Sandra and says without hesitation, "Bullock, that necklace would look perfect on you." The impact of his words is immediate. If the silence had been heavy before, it is now suffocating. Margaret feels her stomach sink. What did he just call her? Bullock, not Sandra Bullock, the name that needs no introduction. That one simple detail makes Margaret realize her mistake in the worst possible way. She hadn't just tried to belittle an ordinary woman, she had attempted to humiliate Sandra Bullock, and now Keanu Reeves was standing by her side. The employees realized this too. The sales associate who had hesitated to assist Sandra now straightens immediately, adopting a far more professional demeanor. Customers whisper among themselves they know each other. Oh my God, she really tried to put down Sandra Bullock. Unbelievable. Margaret feels the humiliation tightening around her like a noose. She has always been the most influential person in the room, but now, in the very space where she once reigned, she is completely outmatched, and that makes her blood boil. Margaret is not one to give up easily. She has always had a way of twisting situations in her favor. This won't be any different. Forcing a smile, she turns to Keanu in response, her voice light as if she's choosing to play along. "You're right, Keanu, true luxury isn't just about what we wear, but let's be honest, a little refinement never hurt anyone." She speaks with a casual tone as if she is agreeing without actually admitting defeat, but Keanu doesn't take the bait. He simply looks at her with that same calm, steady gaze that seems to see right through everything, and then he says something that completely breaks Margaret's composure. "You know, I've always found it funny how some people try to seem superior, but in the end what really matters is how we treat others. This time there is no pretending." It didn't hit her. The words land like a direct hit. Margaret feels the sting of embarrassment deep inside her. The employees watch her carefully, waiting for her reaction. The customers exchange knowing glances, barely hiding their amusement, and Sandra smiles. Not a smug smile, not a victorious smirk, just a simple, effortless smile, and that is worse. The weight of Keanu's words is unbearable. She can feel the way people are looking at her, the silent judgment, and for the first time in as long as she can remember, she doesn't know what to say. Her face burns, her heartbeat pounds in her ears. She could try to defend herself, she could make a sharp remark, but what's left to say? The truth is already clear. She has lost. Margaret Winchester, the woman who always controlled the narrative, now has no control at all. Her white fur coat, once a symbol of her sophistication, now feels suffocating. She needs to leave. Sandra, without the slightest hesitation, turns to the sales associate and says, her voice steady and calm, "I'll take that necklace. There is no question, no uncertainty." The saleswoman, now entirely focused on her, nods and moves quick to package the piece. Keanu simply crosses his arms, casting an unreadable glance at Margaret. Margaret feels her throat tighten. She has never felt so small. Without another word, she turns on her heel and walks out, gripping her phone. She needs to escape this moment, but deep down she knows this humiliation will not be forgotten. Margaret walks out of the jewelry store quickly, the sharp sound of her heels echoing against the polished marble floor. Her heart pounds and she grips her phone tightly. She feels like everyone is still watching her, even after she's left. The crisp Beverly Hills air hits her face, but it does nothing to cool the heat burning her cheeks. She has always been in control of situations. Like this she has always had the last word, but now for the first time in a long time she feels utterly powerless. She walks aimlessly down the sidewalk, trying to process what just happened, the humiliation, Keanu's quiet but commanding presence, the way Sandra never reacted to her provocations and yet still won. Margaret unlocks her phone and scrolls through social media, flicking through posts mindlessly, but nothing holds her attention. Everything feels trivial now. Keanu's words echo in her mind. What really matters is how we treat others. She clenches her jaw. She wants to dismiss it, wants to convince herself that it was just an incident, a misunderstanding, but deep down she knows. She knows she was wrong, and she knows that everyone in the store saw it too. As Margaret walks away, the atmosphere inside the jewelry store shifts. The customers who had been engrossed in the unfolding scene gradually return to their purchases, but there's still a lingering energy in the air. The sales associate returns with a velvet box, carefully opening it to present the necklace Sandra selected. Sandra studies it for a moment before glancing at Keanu, a subtle smile playing on her lips. You think it suits me? Keanu smirks, crossing his arms. Bullock, everything suits you. Sandra chuckles, shaking her head. The employees who had previously ignored her now stand at full attention, ready to assist her with impeccable professionalism. Sandra notices but doesn't comment. She's used to this kind of shift in behavior. With calm confidence she hands over her card and finalizes the purchase. She never had to say anything to prove her worth. Her silence was her most powerful response. And that was the real blow to Margaret. Margaret finally stops walking. She finds herself standing in front of another luxury boutique, but she's not looking at the jewelry in the window. Her own reflection stares back at her, and she doesn't like what she sees. She has never really thought about her actions. She never needed to. She has always been surrounded by people who shared her values, who laughed at her sharp comments, who reinforced the idea that money and image were the only things that mattered. But now for the first time she sees herself differently. What happened in that store made her realize something painful. She wasn't respected, she was feared, and there is a huge difference between the two. Keanu and Sandra didn't fear her. They didn't react with anger or try to put her down. They simply showed, without needing to say it outright, that she never had the power she thought she did, and that was the biggest humiliation of her life. Margaret takes a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. The truth stings, but at the same time she feels something she didn't expect: relief. Because deep down she was tired of the mask, tired of playing a role that never truly fulfilled her. Maybe it was time to change. Hours later, Margaret sits in her car, still holding her phone. She has opened the app multiple times, but she doesn't know what to say. Finally she takes a deep breath and starts typing. Today I learned that you can buy a diamond, but you can't buy class. Thank you, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, for this lesson. She hesitates for a moment. Then, without overthinking, she presses post. She doesn't know what kind of response to expect, but for the first time she doesn't care. Maybe this is the beginning of something different. Maybe for the first time she will actually learn. The phone screen goes dark, but the comment that truly catches her off guard is one she didn't expect. The first step to change is recognizing where we went wrong. She rereads that sentence. Change. She's never thought about it before. Never believed she needed to change, but now for the first time she wonders what if instead of seeing this as a hit to her ego, she saw it as an opportunity. What if instead of ignoring what happened, she actually learned from it? Margaret doesn't have the answer, but for the first time she wants to find it. Margaret sits there watching Sandra disappear into the crowd. She feels something strange, something unfamiliar. Relief. She still doesn't know what it means, but she knows that in that instant she made a different choice than she would have before, and maybe, just maybe, this is the true beginning of change. Margaret closes her eyes for a moment. She could easily just go back to her life, return to her world of luxury and exclusivity, pretend none of this happened. Or she could do something different. She opens Instagram again. This time there's No hesitation, she starts typing. I've learned that class has nothing to do with money, it has everything to do with character. I'm still figuring out who I am beyond what I own, but I know I want to be better, not for status but for myself. She reads the words hesitating for only a second, then she takes a deep breath and presses post. The notifications start rolling in within seconds, likes, shares, comments, but Margaret doesn't need to read them to know that this post means more than anything she's ever shared before. Because this time it wasn't about impressing anyone, it was a truth that finally she was ready to admit. She doesn't know if this change will be permanent, but she knows that for the first time she isn't afraid of it, and maybe that's enough to begin. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.